Hey, it's Chris. What are we talking about today? Firesiege. We're talking pandemic-esque style cooperative game with a tower defense twist, where you're basically trying to outlast the horde in order to achieve a total of 6 objectives before, well, you lose the game. What's different? What do you need to know about it? Pros, cons, everything else? Let's go. So here you can see the board set up in front of you here. You have 3 essential different colored lanes, if you will, that are going to be slowly traversed by your enemies as they improve, upgrade, power up, and try and overwhelm your hero, but also the troops that you can summon to aid on your behalf. 3 different lanes of the 3 different colors segmented into 5 different areas that slowly will be marching from one to the next on their actions. This game is won via achieving 6 of these banners through various goals and objectives cards that you're going to be trying to complete along the way. You're also going to lose this game in several different ways. This game is going to be lost if any of the bad guys reach the very center citadel, where your good guy's, leader is essentially, that gets assassinated. You also lose in the upper right-hand corner if the bad guy marker goes all the way to the skull center. You also lose if I just can't spawn any more bad guys, okay? The last thing I didn't mention as a lose condition is your hero dying. Simple, straightforward enough. There you go. Win-lose conditions, all in a nutshell. How is the dynamic of the game played? Well, on your turn, you're going to have a little bag here. And of this bag, you're going to have tiles that you are going to be taking out 3 at a time and placing on your card. Now, you'll see that these tiles here are double-sided. The white, the light side, and the black, the shadow side. Both of these are going to be relevant because the light side is your actions. The dark side is the AI's system. And that's the main caveat or difference or unique style in this game. But you're going to be able to see other people's right now. For example, on the camera, you can see what actions are on this side. I can only see what's on my side. Similarly, you're going to have these set up in your little holder, so your allies around the table are going to be able to see what bad things await you when you're choosing actions, but no table talk, because otherwise that'd be too easy. You're going to have to go off their slight reactions and nonverbal expressions to basically which one is best for me, but they don't know necessarily what you're choosing on the other side. So therein lies the main dynamic of this game, the hidden-ish information as a whole. So essentially you'd have them slotted here in the board, but I have them face up so you can see what they are. And you're going to be choosing one of them on each of your actions, giving you potentially various options at your disposal. For example, these actions allow you to summon troops or move troops, but also then to gain energy or to gain actions along the way that are going to help you even further. You can also do other things like breach the walls themselves. And therein is also a mixed blessing, if you will. Therein lies another unique dilemma within this game. The breaching of said walls between each of the 3 individually unique lanes, where each of your heroes are, individually located at the beginning of the game if you're playing with anything less than 4. You'll also notice though that the troops and enemies are also allocated to lanes, but you're going to be able to use these breach tokens to essentially create avenues to allow you and your enemies to go back and forth. You can open them, but also close them in order to help your allies and compatriots out that are next door, but also to potentially let the bad guys in and be a little closer than they would be otherwise. Here now you can see one of the other main mechanisms of this game. You have another tracking board that is going to be keeping track of energy. This energy here is going to be utilized on a turn-by-turn basis, either to activate a hero's abilities or to, say, awaken them and flip them to their better side, which then has an active ability you can use on a turn, as well as a passive trait that's going to be available in addition. And it may also upgrade the strength of their attack value, as well as their potential health to go along with it. All of these heroes are asymmetric in their abilities in each sense, and they're going to give you some unique dynamics depending on which ones are together or where they're located on the board. As you can see here in the upper corner, this is another lose condition if the enemy, as I said, gets all the way down to there with its tracker. And so you're going to be slowly moving it around on the enemy's turns on the other side of those cards that I previously mentioned. And so those cards, or these action cards, if you will not only allow this tracking to be moved, but it will also affect that energy board that I was just talking about to potentially cause you to lose energy that's going to be available to you in that sense. You're also having the option to roll the enemy die, which is going to further move this, as well as you'll notice on this tracking situation that there are 2 different types of cards that the enemy will be drawing when they pass over them. Those two types of cards are Warlord cards and Horde cards. Horde cards being the generic, this is what the bad guys are doing on their turn. Again, giving you some basic iconography of how they're going to be interacting and what they're going to be doing to you as a whole. And you also have the Warlord cards. And these guys are going to be spawned on the board as well, with various asymmetric abilities that are going to be taking effect, as well as the strength and the attack that they have, all that are going to be different as they progress throughout the board. 6 of them in this prototype as a whole. Now, the other aspect that I didn't talk about at all is you have mercenaries. Mercenaries are going to be hireable as you go along when the iconography comes up, and depending on some of these tracks where the mercenary values lie on that energy track, as I mentioned earlier, in a sense, they're going to either do a positive effect for you or a negative effect for the enemy. So they are completely fallible, or, well, in this sense, going to be betraying you if you're not careful. You can see here that in the positive effect, they may be affecting those tracks that I just previously mentioned, as well as allowing you to move or manipulate other elements of the board as a whole. And you really need to be managing these tracks in many different ways in order to, well, not fall behind literally and figuratively. Lastly, you can see the objective cards. They tell you how many banners they will provide you of the 6 that you need to win, and you will also see that some of them are just one and done, and some of them will be able to be done several times in order to complete more banners that are going to give you an easier path to victory. Now, obviously, depending on the scenarios, because there are also asymmetric scenarios that you can run through, some of them may be applicable in the scenario you're playing with, and some of them may not be available until you play that specific scenario in the first place. What else do you need to know about this game at this point? Well, the main other interaction or the main mechanism of potential interest is the actual combat, Chris. How do I defeat the enemies? How are the enemies defeating me? What dynamic is going on there? Well, essentially, when you're moving these enemies as they progress through their lanes, whenever these enemies meet, you start to take damage. You start to be able to do damage. The battle itself becomes only when you're in the same area as someone else. And the tricky part with this is what you get to do is you get to assign the whole value of your attack system to enemies that are within that area. And that's going to determine how many and which enemies you can take out. Now, I previously mentioned the warlords, for example, but there are also queens. And so as you're slowly summoning these enemies, if 3 of these ever are in, say, an area together, then you immediately replace them with one of the queens. If you cannot, then you lose. You'll also have the warlords, like I mentioned, and you have nests. Nests are essentially protected areas that are also stronger, but cannot be taken out unless everything else is taken out before them, sort of like you've seen with other pandemic systems. You get to choose how you allocate that strength of an attack. So if my hero's attack is 2, and these guys are each 1, I have 3 enemies. Well, 4 attack, they only have 1 health each. I can take out all 3 and I have 1 left over. Well, if I did say, though, have an enemy there with 4 strength as well as 2 with 2 strength, I would have the ability to say, do I want to take out the 4 or the 2 2s? I cannot do both. It is a cumulative sum in what you can take out. Or, for example, if I had 7 attack strength there total, and I had enemies that were valued with 6, 4, 3, and 2, I would have to choose a sum total of less than 7 in order to defeat what I needed to defeat. But if one of those nests was there for, say, the value of 2, I could not target that before I took out those other enemies present. The pandemic-esque style of it is that when you have the hunters, you have the queens, you have then the nests, you have the warlords, you have 4 different strengths of enemies that you're going to be dealing with, sort of like a little bit of a Spirit Island, if you will, that are all going to have to be taken out in a slightly different pattern or order, depending on who's where, who has what capabilities, and also how close they are to the center of the board in the first place. Where again, the clever and unique thing of the breach becomes very, very important to be able to help out your allies if they get caught in a crunch and you're, hopefully not left twiddling your thumbs in your own lane because you can't get there in the first place. Now, I'm going to leave it there for the overview. If you want more specific rules, check out the rule book or check out several of the preview videos that go over them in much greater detail. Right now, though, let's go into the pros. First off, I was terribly concerned that when I looked at this game in the first place, that it was going to be a rules slog. It was going to be overly complicated. It was going to be just not easy to get to the table in the first place. And I was pleasantly surprised by that. This is a very streamlined tower defense pandemic-esque game, because the last thing you want is something that's going to be incredibly hard to teach other people, especially with the hidden information of you not knowing what's on the reverse side of your tiles in the first place. Ease of accessibility matters nowadays, and this one works from that aspect. The other nice thing is the asymmetry between these heroes. There's enough going on, there's enough action tactical mitigation that you're given some bandwidth to kind of plan accordingly based on how you want to do that. And it sort of also eliminates the alpha gamer situation with you not knowing what's on the other side. And frankly speaking, you know what? Not even caring at times, because you're trying to make the best action for you, not always potentially going to worry about what the bad guys are doing. Now that's a blessing curse, right? Because you may ultimately have no control over picking exactly the wrong thing at the right time as well. The other pro, going back to the objective cards that I mentioned, the fact that some of these can be completed just once and get one banner, but some of them can give you up to as many banners as you may need to win the game as a whole, and all of these being, you know, significantly different enough that it offers some variety. That was a cool thing, and it was a benefit. It was something I was not expecting when I pulled it out initially. I was expecting it to be like, okay, well, you've got 3 objectives and you just need to hit all 3 of these, or you've got 6 different objectives, a la like the loop where you've got the different areas that you just need to complete them all, and if you can't complete them all, well, good luck. The other nice thing, and this is going to sound weird, is the breaches. I actually kind of like the breaches because not only can you open them up to help your fellow allies, but you can also then close them behind you. And that's not something we usually see in a game like this, especially when you only have these 3 lanes and they're really narrow and there is no place to go. It reminds me a little bit of, in that sense, of the lanes situation with, say, like a Planet Apocalypse in that sense. You know, cons, again, this is going to be pandemic cooperative game-esque, right? It's not necessarily giving you as much of the asymmetry if you're looking for that. It's not going to give you as much of the long-term strategy, right? You've got the Warlord decks, which are going to be draws. You've got the enemy decks, you've got the mercenary decks that are just going to be all draws here that you're just going to have to deal with, that you just might get the wrong thing at the wrong time. That is sort of the MO of a chaotic cooperative game. And that's probably, to go along with it, is the other big criticism is there's not a whole lot of mitigation, right? With some of the die rolling that you're going to have to do on the enemy dice or the combat dice in order to get your bonus, or potentially not have kickback. You know, essentially the enemy gets to, you know, damage you back after you attack them. If you don't roll the shield, well, you don't get to block any of that damage. Your hero or your troops are going to take that damage or potentially just be lost. And there's not really a good way to mitigate that as a whole. Also, the abilities are expensive. You have to time it appropriately. This is not going to be a you get everything, you do everything. There really is some resource allocation, because activating, say, your special abilities or awakening to your other side, it costs you 5 of these energies on this track. And you'll notice that there is not a lot of energy on this track in the first place. So it makes it a little bit more tight in terms of not being able to do everything you want on every turn. There's going to have to be some priority there in terms of what you're doing, but also what you're given in the first place. The other con, again, in general speak, the combat is relatively simple and straightforward. You just total up, divvy up. That's it. And so that's going to be something that I can see people not liking and being just maybe a little bit too simplistic for that nature. But it also makes it more streamlined, so there's less of, okay, you know, who does this and who does this, and when does this occur, and when does this reaction take place. And so you're mitigating some of that, but you're giving it up at the same time. And so some people may be looking for a deeper or a more complex or even a more controllable scenario. And that's maybe the boon of it, is you can look out and you can math it in a sense, in a strategic manner, to say, okay, well, we need to get this many here because these enemies are going to be here. But inevitably, someone, you know, pulls the wrong side of a shadow card, someone pulls the wrong mercenary card or the wrong horde card at the wrong time. Your calculations might also just kind of go completely out the window, because there's not always going to be, again, like I said, so much to mitigate that on the reaction side of things when you're dealing with it. And the other last con that I have to mention is that if one of your heroes dies, if you are not careful enough in this game, this is not a last one standing. This is a one person's out and the game is over. And sometimes that's a little bit of an unappealing dynamic in these cooperative games as a whole, but it makes the stakes a little bit higher as well, because you just can't sort of barricade your way in one area and still win. You actually have to space things out, and you can't have one hero who is significantly lagging or hurt more than the others, because inevitably you'll lose because of it. The difficulty is going to be the other big balancing point, right? As a prototype, it's interesting to see the different player count dynamics, as well as just the strength and the amassing of the enemies with the AI system. And that's something that's very tricky in a more tower defense-esque game, where you're, again, not just trying to beat them, you're just trying to survive as a whole. And so it gives you a variable level of several difficulties, but you got to find the right one that's for you, because inevitably some people are going to find it too easy at the higher levels, and some people are going to be finding it too hard at the lower levels. So you got to figure out what you're looking for in a game like this in the first place. And as a side note, I really like the fact that these are colored standees and wooden meeples. I think the aesthetic is just kind of cool. It puts a better table presence, I think, than just gray plastic chunks of miniatures. And you know what? I just have to give them a shout out for doing that in these sort of games in the first place. And so that's always my preference as a whole. I know I'm biased, but it's cool. So final thoughts. Ultimately, the big thing that I would say is I wouldn't have minded a little bit more mitigation, a little bit of a way to mitigate beyond, the cool asymmetric powers that the heroes give you. And that's probably the biggest way that you're going to be mitigating. But you're not going to have as much way to deal with, say, the die rolling or the enemy draw decks as you may like, to give yourself a little bit more of a strategic option. It's light, it's fun. There's enough elements in it that you're going to have some moving parts and having to deal with them. There's not enough moving parts, though, to make you feel overwhelmed, especially if you're looking for, say, a step up from a pandemic, but not necessarily wanting to get into something that's as chaotic as maybe even the Loop, or even, say, a Spirit Island-esque by any means. It's definitely lighter than the other cooperative games I've played in the past year on crowdfunding. Lighter than Peacemakers, lighter than Weirdwood Manor, or even say something like Defenders of the Wild. And I don't say as a bad thing, but as okay, where does this game weight stack up? Higher, a little bit more complex than a Pandemic, but a little bit lower than all of those as well. Like I said, the asymmetry is there. I wouldn't mind a little bit more asymmetry or a little bit more customization of the heroes as a whole. I really like the variable objectives in order to get, anywhere from 1 to 6 different banners of the 6 needed total in order to complete the objective. And they're also going to be giving you sort of a little bit of a campaign mode. There's also a solo mode that you can play two-handed. I can't speak to either of those. I didn't really get a chance to play either of that. But just from a pure cooperative standpoint, I'd also say probably the recommended player count is definitely going to be 3 or 4. 4 is maybe a little bit easier because you've got at least 1 hero in every lane and 1 lane with 2. 3 is going to be about where you want to be, because otherwise with 2 heroes going in with all 3 of those lanes is going to be, significantly higher on the difficulty scale. The only other thing I worry about is that if you're playing this game like a Pandemic, if you're playing it, half a dozen times, I know, right? But you're going to start to figure out a little bit of, if I choose this action on this side, right, I'm going to remember, or how big of a memory issue is it going to be if you can start recalling what's on the other side, so that you can start guessing a little bit. The other interesting, tricky dynamic of this, right, is that you have these hunters, and if 3 of these hunters get into a same area, what automatically makes a queen. And so sometimes you may actually want to have a queen made, because if you run out of these, well, similarly, if you run out of queens, it reminds me very much of the kids game, Ghost Fighting Treasure Hunters, where the exact same thing happens, right? You have the little ghosties, and if you have 3 of them in a room, they make a super ghosty. And well, sometimes you actually kind of want the super ghost because it clears out the room that may be preventing you from that dynamic of dealing with it as easily. Only in this game, you can run out of these guys just as much as you can run out of the queens. And so you have to be very careful, but it brings up interesting strategy when one enemy morphs into another. I guess that is sort of a double-edged sword, if you will, because, well, the whole purpose of having these is that you can't see them, so you don't know what you're getting. But at the same time, if you want more strategy in the game as a whole, you could easily start remembering these and, I guess, seeing if yours match up with what other people's are. And so you're getting into a little bit of the metagaming situation. If you switch characters, if you have a little bit of asymmetry, obviously, between the characters, it kind of negates that in the first place. So how much of that hidden information, or just frankly speaking, guessing that you don't grab the wrong one at the wrong time, because you're also just pulling them out one at a time and having 3 available to you, are you going to like as well from that aspect? So there you go. Firesiege, Feralis story from Deer Games. Send me the prototype so I could talk to you about it. run you through everything that you can hopefully need to know whether or not this is right for you. Making an informed decision on your crowdfunding purchases, as always. Have a great day. Stay classy. See you around.